For many of today's children, World War II can seem like a dusty piece of distant history. But that's not the case today in Granite Falls, Minnesota. These kids are talking with Colonel Clarence E. Bud Anderson, a World War II AAA's fighter pilot who's sharing his memories of that great event.
1 month after Pearl Harbor, and of course I rushed right down to the recruiting station and joined immediately. Does anybody have a question?
Were you scared?
Naturally, I was afraid. We were there to do our duty for our country. The first few missions were scary. Just flying over enemy territory was scary because you knew if you went down, you'd be captured. Does anybody else have a question? Yes.
Who were we fighting? And did we win?
Well, World War II was a tremendously big event. We were fighting people all over the world, and yes, we did win in 1945.
For the children, it's an opportunity they won't have too much longer. As we lose nearly 1,000 World War II veterans each day, we find ourselves faced with a profound question. When the last soldier passes into history, how will we connect the greatest generation with the latest generation?
How would you guys like to go out and see a real World War II fighter plane?
Me!
All right, let's go.
Though nothing can replace history's eyewitnesses, we can turn to the aircraft, who had names, personalities, and stories all their own. Most of these planes have passed on, but some are being restored to their former glory, including this special warbird owned by Ron and Diane Fagan. She is a plane with a uniquely colorful past, and her journey to this place in time nearly 70 years after her birth is nothing short of miraculous. January 1945. As the war rages on, a 25-year-old pilot from New York, Lieutenant Hubert Davis, arrives at England's Duxford Aerodrome. He joins the 8th Air Force's 78th Fighter Group, and he will fly a Mustang, the plane that has helped turn the tide of the war, but that almost never even existed.
The British sent a commission over here to the United States. And what they wanted us to do was go to the factories and get a contract for them to build the current state-of-the-art fighter for England. The P-40 was the state-of-the-art. Well, when they got to the North American company, they said, hey, look, why don't you let us build you a new fighter? And matter of fact, North American said that they would do it in something like 120 days. Remarkable.
North American Aviation's president, Dutch Kindleberger, promised to build the British a new fighter escort plane, even though the company had never designed one before. When the first P-51 Mustang rolled off the assembly line, it was clear that the risk had paid off.
Because of the fact that it was built under pressure and in such a short amount of time to join the war effort, it just shows the American ingenuity. I mean, it's the ultimate example.
When we arrived in England, we were assigned P-51 B Bravos, and then later C models. Then the Ds came along with the classic bubble canopy, as you see here. When I came back for my second tour, I took a D automatically. It was the airplane to have.
The D model Mustang was mechanically superior to the early models that had come previously with the Merlin engine and the 650 caliber machine guns and the bubble canopy.
It had a new wing design, the laminar flow wing. And then it had a very unusual radiator underneath in the back for cooling. And it had a two-stage, two-speed supercharger. So it was very good at high altitude. And it was a very maneuverable, fantastic airplane to fly. I felt very confident that it could whip anything the Germans had.
American pilots fly the P-51D on dangerous missions into German territory in 1944 and 45. Colonel Anderson describes what those days were like for him and the other 8th Air Force pilots, like Lieutenant Hubert Davis.
Being in the 8th Air Force, our mission, our primary mission, was to destroy the Luftwaffe, but while escorting the bombers. Getting a big armada of bombers in the sky took a long time, and so we could hear them taking off when it was still early. And when we heard them take off, we knew we were going to go. We took off in twos, 2 at a time, in formation. The first 4 airplanes would soon form up in what we call that finger 4 formation, and slowly start to orbit the field. And then the next group of 4 would get with them. You flew along until you saw the proper number letters on the tail of bombers, and then you got into your escort formation. Then you'd watch these guys fly through the flak, and believe me, that is something to watch. I have the utmost respect for the bomber pilots. You'd see these bombers go in there, and the flak would come up and leave black, 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 black. That cloud would stay there. And here comes another one, do that same cloud. Black, 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 black. I'd say that 9 times out of 10, we arrived over the target during the noon hour. A couple hours home, it'd be mid-afternoon. And then you landed. The first thing you had to do was get with the intelligence officer and get debrief on what happened. If he made a claim, that's the time you do it. And then we'd all pretty much always went to the officers' club afterwards and met the other guys and talk about the mission.
Lieutenant Davis and the Duxford Eagles of the 78th Fighter Group fly dozens of missions in the first months of 1945. In February, they lose 18 pilots. Lieutenant Davis not only survives these treacherous months, but flies to 3 victories over Nazi aircraft. The following account is taken from his actual combat report.
I was flying cargo Yellow 2 on Captain Higginbottom's wing, heading southeast at 21,000 feet when approximately 24 Me-109s reported at 6 o'clock low, 15,000 feet. Captain Higginbottom went after one 109, and I turned into 2 coming at me from my right. I went after the number 2 man, and after completing a 360 to the left, I was able to hit him with about a 30-degree deflection shot. The plane turned over, pouring out dense black smoke, and went spiraling straight down. I followed on his tail, shooting until I hit about 6,000 feet, then pulled off to one side as I was going about 400 miles per hour. I followed him down through clouds and saw the plane hit. I did not see the pilot bail out, nor did I see any chute open. Hubert Davis, March 3rd, 1945.
With several missions under his belt, Lieutenant Davis will soon be assigned a brand new Mustang, and he'll have the honor of giving her a name. The P-51 Mustang had turned the tide of the air war against the German Luftwaffe thanks in part to Lieutenant Hubert Davis and the pilots of the 8th Air Force. Now Lieutenant Davis would be joined with a new Mustang and fly with her in the most dramatic years of her young life.
I don't think there's ever been a tighter relationship between the pilots and the airplane in World War II. It was a do-or-die situation. I think the military let them express what they were thinking and feeling, and so a lot of the names mean something to the pilots.
It was a great honor for these guys to be able to name and personalize their airplanes in combat. It just made for one great fighting unit when everybody had that personal touch.
I think all pilots form a relationship with an airplane they've spent quite a bit of time in, and especially World War II. I can absolutely imagine their life depends on that airplane, you know, taking them to war and bringing them back after a battle.
I went out to the flight line, I put that airplane on, and the airplane and I are one single thing, so to speak. Yeah, there was a great feeling about your own personal airplane.
When Lieutenant Davis meets his new Mustang in April 1945, it's known only by its Air Corps serial number, 4463864. Lieutenant Davis considers the names his fellow pilots have given their aircraft: Bonnie B, the Green Hornet, Hell's Bell, bosom cousin, he decides to do something different. Draw on his love of horse racing. Remembering a blazing Kentucky filly who was named Horse of the Year in 1944, he names his mount Twilight Tear. Although the war is in its latter stages, Twilight Tear sees intense action as Lieutenant Davis and the Duxford Eagles pound German aircraft, factories, and bridges. Between March 1945 and the end of hostilities, the Duxford Eagles account for more enemy aircraft destroyed in the air and on the ground than any other 8th Air Force unit. Flying with Lieutenant Davis and the 83rd Squadron, Twilight Tear herself flies 8 missions in just 2 weeks.
April 16th, 1945 was probably one of the most historic missions that Twilight Tear would have flown. The 83rd took off that day, and they were attacking airfields throughout Germany, and they actually claimed 88 enemy aircraft that day. The average for the squadron was 6 airplanes, so it was a monumental day for the 78th. That kind of signified the ending of the war. Germany was just at a point where it couldn't support the Luftwaffe any longer.
With the Nazis crippled, Twilight Tear flies her last mission to an infamous location near the German-Austrian border.
April 25th, 1945, Twilight Tear would have taken off out of Duxford with the task of attacking rail yards in Czechoslovakia. And during that mission, the squadron was actually rerouted and met up with 12 Lancaster bombers that were on a mission to drop tallboy bombs on Hitler's Eagle's Nest. And so to be a part of that mission, on the last flight that the 78th flew was a pretty unique mission for Twilight Tear.
5 days after the attempted mission on Eagle's Nest, Adolf Hitler commits suicide. On May 8th, the Nazis surrender, and VE Day is declared. Lieutenant Davis receives orders to ship home and returns to New York in July 1945. But what about his Mustang?
Nobody really considered what happened to the aircraft after the war. There was aircraft all over the world, and the U.S. was tasked with deciding what we're going to do with these aircraft.
A lot of the airplanes in World War II, if they just got left over in the theater that they were at and cut up, that's why you hardly see any airplanes that have combat history, because if they were in combat, it was just easier to cut them up and get rid of them than to ship them back to the U.S.
Though the 8th Air Force suffered the highest casualty rate of any Army unit, Twilight Tear is still full of life. The question is, where will life take her next? The men of the 8th Air Force had done their part to end the Nazi threat, and the war was finally over. But while Lieutenant Hubert Davis was safely back home, the future of his Mustang, Twilight Tear, was anything but certain. After starting life in Inglewood, California, and serving with the Duxford Eagles, Twilight Tear travels to Germany for storage. After a 2-year wait, she is again called upon to serve, this time in Sweden.
The Swedes obviously wanted to buy aircraft that were low time, that had, either some minor damage or had been produced late enough that they hadn't seen the stress and the rigors of war.
Twilight Tear is delivered to the Royal Swedish Air Force on June 13, 1947. A fresh paint job conceals the name given to her by her American pilot, Lieutenant Hubert Davis, and she is assigned a new Swedish serial number, FV26158. Her exact duties in Sweden remain a mystery. What is known is that after 4 years of service, she would join yet another military force. In September of 1952, Twilight Tear becomes one of only 25 Swedish Mustangs purchased by Israel, and on February 9, 1953, she is delivered to the Israeli Defense Forces. This photo shows her actual Israeli identity with the 101 Squadron as IDF AF 3506.
Mustangs in Israel are kind of an unknown to us, but what we do know is that it would have seen some sort of combat in the mid-50s during the conflict with Egypt.
But despite Twilight Tear's continued combat readiness in Israel, The rapid advancement of jet technology means the prop plane's military days are numbered. The IDF eventually phases out its Mustangs, and Twilight Tier is turned over to Israel Aircraft Industries. Again, she is placed in storage. Back home, Twilight Tier's namesake, a filly born the same year America entered the war, dies in 1954. Her racing days are over, but the Mustang who bears her name is just getting warmed up. Few names are more famous or recognized in the aviation world than Lear. As the founder of the Lear Jet Corporation, William Lear accumulated more than 150 patents and is also credited with inventing the car radio, the 8-track tape player, and the jet plane autopilot system. In the late 1950s, Bill Lear and his son Bill Jr. moved to Geneva, Switzerland, so the senior Lear can sell radio and autopilot systems to foreign airlines. Flying since the age of 15, Bill Jr. had become the youngest pilot to race a Lockheed P-38 in the Bendix Trophy races. But it was his time in the Texas Air National Guard, coupled with his U.S. Air Force service in Germany, that likely built his passion for one particular aircraft, the P-51 Mustang. In 1960, he decides to shop for a Mustang where he knows he can find them in relatively good condition: Israel. Israel Aircraft Industries introduces Lear to its best Mustang, IDF AF 3506. Bill Lear buys the plane on July 18, 1960. She is registered in the United States as November 251 Lima, making Twilight Tier the first IDF Mustang to be sold abroad. Bill Jr. adds several enhancements to Twilight Tier. His younger brother John remembers what he did to make the plane his own.
He loved the Mustang. He flew it a lot. He installed the Lear radios and put the F5 autopilot into it. And his theory was he was going to demonstrate my father's line of radio and autopilot equipment to airline executives and chief pilots using the 51.
Twilight Tier was a test bed for Lear's autopilot. Same autopilot that's in the DC-10 today, right here in this airplane. So it's amazing. Early technology and an autopilot that served this country for many years.
As flight logs reveal, Twilight Tier enjoys a busy flying schedule in and around Geneva in 1961. But eventually, Bill Lear realizes that he must part ways with his beloved plane.
My brother had an emotional attachment to it. He just loved the airplane. And I know he was upset to see it go. And however, he's, every chance he gets, he used to fly one.
Lear places a newspaper ad offering Twilight Tier for purchase as a custom-built executive Mustang. His language is as colorful as the man himself.
Docile as a lamb, agile as a ballerina, climbs like a homesick angel. Ideal for the man with dash who is really going places and wants to get there in a hurry.
The ad catches the eye of William Pierce of Fullerton, California, and on December 11, 1962, Twilight Tier appears bound for the state of her birth. But as Lear flies his beloved Mustang for the last time, leaving her in Paris to be flown to the States by another pilot, he has no idea that by signing her bill of sale, he is nearly signing her death warrant. The P-51 Mustang, known as Twilight Tier, has already flown with 3 air forces and one of aviation's most famous families. Now her world travels are scheduled to lead her back home across the Atlantic. But will she make it? Twilight Tier's flight plan takes into account the Mustang's impressive, though still limited, mileage range. She will fly from Paris to New York via England, Iceland, Greenland, and Canada. Her new owner, William Pierce, authorizes Roger Arnault to pilot the plane. Arnault has extensive experience in cross-Atlantic flight, but what Pierce doesn't realize is that the French pilot has never flown a P-51.
The first time he flew a Mustang was to take it and fly it across the Atlantic. I wouldn't have done that.
It's kind of a little careless, maybe foolishness to do that. At least talk to somebody who's flown one and maybe get a ride in one if you can. But just to hop in there and do it, that's pretty foolish act to do.
The radio transcript from Arnault's approach to Keflavik, Iceland on June 6, 1963, shows excellent afternoon weather conditions. The temperature is a balmy 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Twilight Tier shows no signs of mechanical difficulties, and neither pilot nor controller anticipates any problems.
He came in, bounced on his landing, gave her full power to recover, which you can do in a general aviation airplane, no problem. The airplane goes straight ahead. But on a Mustang, he bounced, and when you bounce a Mustang, it feels like you're launched 80 feet in the air, but you're really not.
A lot of pilots in the past have got maybe a little anxious once they bounce it and get in a hurry and they just jam the throttle forward, and then then the airplane just rolls over on you. You can't control it at that point.
Ironically, as Twilight Tier is stored away in Iceland, her thoroughbred namesake is posthumously inducted into the National Museum of Racing's Hall of Fame. By 1963, Twilight Tier's adventures have taken her from the palm trees of Southern California to the Western Front of World War II, to the mountains of Switzerland and the deserts of the Middle East. Now, she is relegated to storage in a remote part of the world with little hope of ever flying again. On February 25, 1991, she finds a new owner based in Canada. Then, on July 20th, 1991, she is purchased by warbird restorer Ken Hake and finally returns to American soil.
Looked in Trader Plane and found a P-51 project for sale. A guy by the name of Cham Gill had it, and had his number. I called him and he told me about it, and I bought it from him, and he had it at the time. It was shipped in Iceland, and had it shipped to Tipton, Kansas.
When Hake decides to retire before he has a chance to restore his Mustang, he remembers some old friends, Ron and Diane Fagan of Granite Falls, Minnesota. And on October 14, 2005, the Fagans buy the Mustang project. The Fagans own Fagan Fighters, a company dedicated to restoring and preserving what it refers to as the most influential fighter aircraft ever to grace the skies. The Fagans' connection to World War II aircraft is a personal one.
My dad was in 4th Infantry. He participated in the Battle of Bulge, and himself and 2 other guys were sitting in their little trench there, and the weather was horrible. They figured this is it. The game is over, and all of a sudden, the sky cleared up enough, and here comes a P-38, and strafed the enemy and saved those folks' life. And so all of his life, he talked about how the P-38 saved myself and my buddies.
My dad and I and my brother are able to be here because of that, we believe, and I think that got the itch started for my parents to get interested in World War II aviation.
Twilight Tier is really my favorite of all the things that have gone through these shops because of the history we've been able to find out. We've been able to talk to people who owned the airplane at different times, and it's made it more exciting.
Because Twilight Tier has been painted over so many times, her true identity and her World War II history have been largely forgotten. But as the Fagan family sets out to restore the old Mustang, they'll make a startling discovery. Twilight Tier has scarcely been touched since she crashed in Iceland some 40 years ago. The Fagans know they have a P-51D Mustang to restore. What they don't know is her true identity.
We knew the Lear background, yep, but it was what they discovered after that that was amazing.
The restoration begins at Tri-State Aviation in Wahpeton, North Dakota.
My late husband, Jerry Beck, was the founder of Tri-State Aviation. He was a tremendous innovator, passionate about aviation in all forms and was a wonderful mentor to myself and anybody that worked with him. He went into the warbird industry in about 1982 when he purchased a Project Corsair. And from that time on, the company evolved into warbirds and specifically Mustangs.
As Jerry Beck digs into research on the Fagan's Mustang project, he finds something unexpected.
When Jerry and Mark and Eric called and hunted me down one day and said, you know, Ron, these numbers check out. We have a real piece of history. We have Twilight Tier. I said, okay, guys, it's going to be just like the day it rolled off the assembly line. That's what we want here. If we got a real true piece of history like this, we need to make it right.
The Mustang restoration was already an enormous undertaking. Now, the bar is raised even higher.
The Fagan family seems to have an interest in restoring the airplanes back to original condition the way they were in 1945. We get the same feeling that a pilot and factory worker and crew members had during World War II.
For North American, when they built these airplanes during World War II, they had what they called a part number tree. So you started off at the top of the tree that had the part number of the airplane. Then it breaks it down into fuselage and wing, and then subsections of that, and then into the subsystems that go into those pieces as we go back to that level, just as the factory did.
Over several years, the Twilight Tier project sets new standards for authenticity in a Mustang restoration, covering every detail to bring the famous warbird back to life.
During the 30s, the hydraulic lines, it was mostly brass fittings. Modern aircraft have aluminum fittings that are blues. In those parts, we had to custom manufacture, and so when you look in the wheel well, you'll see that all these nuts, they're brass nuts in the airplane.
The interesting challenge with finding parts, it's the thrill of the hunt. Yeah, in the restoration of Twilight Tier, we tried very hard to find original components. If there was components that needed to be replaced, we may have had the option to just buy a modern replacement part, but instead we chose to dig deeper to find the original North American-made part.
Yeah, the radios on the airplane, there's wiring and there's Canon plug connectors. There isn't one source you can go to and buy a complete radio set to put in a P-51. A lot of people just throw a box in there and call it out, it's good enough. We found pieces all over the country, found all the correct connectors and printed up all the wires just as in the blueprints and had all that installed. We installed the original flare gun mount and have the flare gun in the airplane. One of the other neat little details that we found is there's a pocket for what they call a message drop bag. It's just a little pouch that you could put a message in and stick it in the pouch and throw it out the window of the airplane and drop it to the troops. We installed the K-14 gun sight. We found a very good condition one, opened it up, looked inside. There's probably 3 or 4 Mustangs in the world that have a gun sight that actually functions, that's installed in the airplane.
In some cases we would, there's places where details are hidden that nobody probably will ever see again.
Twilight Tier's exterior markings are treated with equal care.
And one of the fun things we do is not only try and find the parts, the replacement parts, but and do research specifically on the airplane, but we do all kinds of research on processes.
The level of detail on the airplane is sort of unparalleled and unapproached in the business. What a lot of people don't realize is that a Mustang has hundreds of markings.
There's other people that have replicated all those same markings, but we tried to stick with the process as well. Those originally were applied with a rubber ink stamp at the factory. In most typical restorations, it would just kind of be reproduced with paint, but when you paint it on, it looks different than when you apply it with a rubber stamp.
We applied them to the aircraft in the same fashion that they did in World War II. They didn't mind if they smudged a stamp. The angle was a little bit off. They were working at getting airplanes out, and so we honored that. The swastikas being backwards on Twilight Tier is just one of those little quirks that were pointed out in the build process. As we look at it, it's either somebody put the stencil on backwards or that it was sort of a sign of disrespect to the Germans.
The checkerboards on the nose, that identifies the airplane as being with the 78th Fighter Group. The HL that you see on the side and the wingtip and the rudder markings, that identifies the fighter group that the airplane flew with, and then the W identifies this specific airplane.
With Twilight Tier, there was a lot of speculation about what the actual script Twilight Tier looked like, and so we jumped into the mission of finding an original photo of Twilight Tier. There's people out there who've got shoeboxes full of their father's photos, and that's a very good likelihood of where this photo came from. And it was like striking gold.
As Twilight Tier's identity is restored, unfortunately, it is also challenged.
There was another Mustang that was flying that had the name Twilight Tier on it. The other airplane used the Swedish data tag to claim its provenance. The problem with that is that this airplane had the Swedish tag removed from it when it was converted in 1960 for Bill Lear, and that data plate was removed in Israel. Our suspicion is that that plate somehow made it from being removed from this airplane, sitting in a desk drawer for 20-some years, and then was reapplied to another airplane.
It was decided that there was a mix-up with the other airplane's identity, and that this airplane was in fact the Twilight Tier.
After a long and thorough investigation, the FAA affirms that the Air Corps serial number 4463864 belongs to the plane owned by Fagan Fighters, the authentic Twilight Tier.
A recreation of original without the history isn't quite as enticing in the warbird world as Twilight Tier would be, because it does have the history. It is that airplane, and then it was made to original.
Identity affirmed, it's now time for Twilight Tier's most important test, flight.
I can fly Mustang, but Kevin Eldridge is one of the best and experienced for testing first-time flown airplanes.
I've known Ron a few years and flown his airplane collection, and when the Twilight Tier restoration was being done, he contacted me to test fly it. The first time I went up and inspected the airplane, the workmanship that they had accomplished on the restoration was phenomenal. It was just like North American had it, so it's just incredible to see the workmanship that men and women did in the 40s being recreated now. We all were just excited to see it in the air that first time, and it performed just the way it was supposed to.
The second pilot to fly the plane is the Fagan son, Evan.
I've been flying the Mustang for 8 years, and started flying when I was 23, so I was probably one of the younger ones at the time. You know, World War II, they were 19, 20, so it was pretty neat to be able to be a younger guy flying it. When I'm sitting in the seat of Twilight Tier, and you do think about the other guys that have sat there, think of Hubert Davis and Bill Lear, and knowing that they were behind the controls of the same airplane, it is really neat because those guys carry a lot of history.
But the Fagans aren't done yet. With Twilight Tier looking and flying like her old self, they decide to take her restoration into unprecedented territory.
We actually put live 50 caliber machine guns in the airplane and test fired them on the ground, not in the air, which no other Mustang that I know of in recent years, probably in the last 40 years, has done that.
I wish I actually would have been here to be able to pull that trigger just to see what it felt like. Hopefully Twilight Tier will get to go in the air and shoot those guns someday, but just to be able to have that happen is amazing.
Almost 70 years after she helped the 78th Fighter Group dismantle the German Luftwaffe, half a century since Bill Lear flew her above the Swiss Alps, and looking far different than she did after nearly being lost forever on an Icelandic runway, the old Mustang reintroduces herself to the world at the 2011 Oshkosh Air Venture Convention, once again displaying the name inspired by a champion thoroughbred.
I heard Twilight Tier was going to be at Oshkosh, and so I made sure I would get there this year. And when I seen it, it was the most beautiful P-51 I've ever seen, and I was pleasantly surprised at what they'd done with the airplane. I knew it would be a grand championship winner.
When you have the Mustang sitting there, and you have a guy come up who flew those, you tell him to climb on up, and they get in the plane, and they're 20 years old again. You just see years shed off of them. They get a smile and they get a tear.
I'm amazed each year I go to Oshkosh and see the young kids come up and look at the airplanes. And that encourages me that what we're doing is worthwhile.
And like the champion filly who inspired her name, Twilight Tear takes home nearly every award there is to win. The Oshkosh judges like what they see. But what about those children back in Granite Falls?
Look at all these wires. Makes me want to fly.
Hey guys, you want to see it fly?
Yeah!
Even a lot of kids, surprisingly, are knowledgeable and interested. But I think it's not a great majority, and we need to remember our history. But to keep these warbirds actually flying is incredible. And I'd take my hats off to the warbird community that we have here in the United States that's willing to do this. These are national treasures.
It's just great to be able to share these things with kids today. The greatest generation gave their all for a cause, and I think it's nice for today's kids to be aware of that. We are running the risk of them never hearing these stories directly.
I think during World War II and afterwards, the greatest generation, we were just doing what we had to do.
This is a lot more than restoring a machine. It's bringing history to life. And if we're able to have young children walk up and touch an airplane such as Twilight Tear and interact with a member of the greatest generation, I think that's so much more important than just turning a page in a history book.
What the people in this country did to keep our freedom was amazing in World War II. A lot of our younger generations they're clueless, they have no idea, and the younger generations have to be reminded about the greatest generation and remind them why they are free today. That's the most important thing in my life right now, outside my family, is keeping that alive, trying to teach people and let them never forget what happened in those years.
Right near the very end of the project, we were applying all the markings to the outside of the airplane, and Ron Fagan brought his grandson out to the airport and just kind of let him hang out, and he wanted to help. And so it's like, wow, that's kind of neat. A young kid that wants to help work on World War II airplanes, that's amazing. To be able to work with a young kid that has that interest, that has that connection, and to have him help apply some of the markings to the airplane, that was just a great honor for me.
Someday, sooner than we'd like, the headline will read, "Last World War II veteran dies." When that day comes, how will we connect the greatest generation with the latest generation? One way is to restore America's warbirds to their former glory. And perhaps no plane loops the past and the future more gracefully than a P-51 Mustang who has once again reached her full stride, offering not only a portal to the past, but an immortal connection to America's greatness. Her name is, was, and always will be Twilight Tear.